You're new to investing, the stock market can feel complicated. There are thousands of companies. There are charts moving up and down. There are financial terms that sound like another language. And every day, there seems to be another headline telling you about the next company that could change everything. But investing doesn't have to feel like a race. It doesn't have to feel like gambling. And you don't need to become a Wall Street expert before you can understand the basic idea. At its simplest, investing is about owning a piece of something productive. When you buy a stock, you're buying a small ownership stake in a real business. That business might sell phones. It might provide software. It might process payments. It might deliver products. It might provide cloud computing. And when those businesses grow and become more valuable over time, the people who own shares can potentially benefit from that growth. That's the basic idea. And once you understand that, the stock market starts to look very different. Instead of staring at a screen full of numbers, you can start asking a much simpler question. What businesses do I understand? Think about your everyday life. Maybe you use an iPhone. Maybe you use Microsoft software at school or work. Maybe you buy something from Amazon. Maybe you pay for something using a Visa or MasterCard. Maybe you use Google every day. Maybe you stream entertainment through a major technology company. These aren't just products and apps. Behind them are businesses. Businesses with employees, customers, technology, factories, data centers, stores, patents, brands, and billions of dollars flowing through their operations. And some of those businesses have been around for decades. That's one of the most useful ideas for a beginner to understand. You don't necessarily have to search for the company nobody has heard of. Sometimes the businesses you already see everywhere are worth studying first. Take Visa, for example. When you swipe or tap your card, Visa generally isn't the bank lending you the money. Instead, Visa operates a payment network that helps connect financial institutions, merchants, and consumers. Every transaction moving through that network can contribute to the company's business. That's an interesting model. You don't have to understand every technical detail to understand the basic concept. The world is becoming increasingly digital. People buy things online. People pay with cards. People use mobile wallets. Businesses accept electronic payments. And companies operating payment networks can benefit from the enormous amount of economic activity moving through their systems. That doesn't mean Visa's stock is guaranteed to rise. No stock is. It simply means the underlying business is worth understanding. And that is the mindset a beginner should develop. Don't begin with the question, how fast will this stock make me rich? Begin with, what does this company actually do? Then ask, how does it make money? Why do customers choose it? What could make the business stronger? And what could make the business weaker? Those questions take you much further than simply watching a stock chart. Now think about another company that has become deeply connected to modern work. Microsoft. For many people, Microsoft is no longer just the company behind Windows. Its business stretches across software, cloud computing, productivity tools, gaming, enterprise services, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. Think about how many businesses depend on digital tools. Employees communicate through software. Companies store information in the cloud. Organizations use productivity applications. Developers build applications using cloud infrastructure. Businesses increasingly depend on technology to operate. That creates an enormous market. Microsoft is one of the companies competing for that market. Again, the lesson isn't that Microsoft must be the perfect investment. There is no perfect stock. The lesson is that beginners can learn to look at a business from the inside out. What problem does it solve? Who pays for the solution? How strong is the company's position? Does it have loyal customers? Does it have the ability to keep innovating? And does the price of the stock make sense relative to the company's prospects? That last question matters. A fantastic company can still be an expensive investment if investors pay too much for it. This is where investing becomes more interesting. You're not simply choosing a famous company. You're evaluating a business. Now think about Apple. For millions of people, Apple's products are part of everyday life. The iPhone became one of the most recognizable consumer products in the world. But Apple's business isn't simply about selling phones. It has built an ecosystem around hardware, software, services, applications, payments, subscriptions, and accessories. And that ecosystem creates something incredibly valuable: convenience. When people already own multiple products from the same company, switching can become less attractive. The devices work together. The services work together. The accounts are connected. The experience feels familiar. That kind of customer relationship can become a powerful business advantage. Apple also demonstrates another important investing concept. A company's brand can be an economic asset. People don't always choose products purely because of technical specifications. They choose products because of trust, design, convenience, familiarity, and experience. A strong brand can influence what people buy for years. But once again, there's an important distinction. A great company isn't automatically a great stock at every price. Investors still have to consider valuation, competition, growth expectations, and the risks surrounding the business. That's why the goal shouldn't be to find a company that can never go down. The goal is to understand what you're buying. Now let's talk about Amazon. When most people hear Amazon, they think about packages arriving at their door. But there's a much larger business underneath that familiar shopping experience. Amazon operates one of the world's largest e-commerce platforms. It also operates Amazon Web Services, commonly known as AWS, which provides cloud computing infrastructure to businesses and organizations around the world. That means Amazon isn't simply a company that ships boxes. It participates in multiple enormous markets: retail, cloud computing, advertising, subscriptions, digital services, logistics, and other areas of commerce and technology. The cloud business is especially important to understand. Imagine a new company wants to build an application. Instead of purchasing an enormous amount of physical computer equipment, it can rent computing resources from a cloud provider. As the company grows, it can increase the amount of computing power it uses. That creates a business model where technology infrastructure becomes a service. And Amazon is one of the major players in that market. Once again, you don't need to predict exactly what Amazon will look like 10 years from now. You simply need to understand the business you're studying. That's a much more sustainable approach to investing. But here's where we reach one of the most important ideas for beginners. You don't necessarily need to choose individual stocks at all. There is another approach that can make diversification much simpler. Index funds. Imagine trying to choose a single company that will dominate the American economy for the next several decades. That's difficult. Nobody knows exactly which companies will become the future giants. Some businesses will grow, some will struggle, some will disappear, and new companies will emerge. Instead of trying to predict the single winner, an index fund can allow investors to own a broad collection of companies through one investment. One famous example is an S&P 500 index fund. The S&P 500 tracks large US companies across many industries. Instead of putting everything into one company, an investor can gain exposure to a broad group of businesses through a fund designed to track that index. This changes the entire investing experience. You don't have to wake up every morning wondering whether one particular company is going to succeed. You're participating in a much broader part of the economy. And that's why broad diversification is such an important concept for beginners. Imagine owning only one company. If that business encounters serious problems, your entire investment is affected. Now imagine owning hundreds of companies across different industries. One company might struggle while another grows. One industry might slow down while another expands. The performance of your investment is spread across many businesses. Diversification doesn't eliminate risk, but it can reduce the impact of relying on one company. And for many beginners, simplicity can be extremely valuable. There's another concept that matters even more than finding the perfect stock: time. Investing is often less about what happens next week and more about what happens over many years. Businesses can grow, profits can increase, new products can be created, customers can multiply, technology can improve, and companies can reinvest money back into their operations. Over long periods, that growth can potentially compound. Compounding is one of the most powerful ideas in finance. Imagine you invest money and it earns a return. If you leave those gains invested, they can become part of the amount that participates in future growth. Then those future gains can generate additional gains. It can feel slow at the beginning, but over long periods, the effect can become much more meaningful. That's why consistency matters. You don't need to make a huge investment on your first day. You can focus on building a habit. If you're legally able to invest, or if you're investing through an account set up with a parent or guardian where appropriate, the important lesson is to understand what you're buying and why you're buying it. For someone just learning, even studying how investing works can be valuable before putting real money into the market. You can learn what an index fund is. You can learn how companies generate revenue. You can read annual reports. You can compare businesses. You can learn basic financial statements. You can watch how markets behave over time. You can build knowledge before you build a portfolio. That's something social media often gets backwards. Online, investing can look like a game of prediction. Someone posts a chart. Someone announces a stock pick. Someone claims they found the next huge company. And suddenly everyone wants to jump in. But successful investing doesn't have to be exciting. In fact, boring can be a feature. A simple strategy that you understand can be much easier to maintain than a complicated strategy you constantly second guess. Imagine checking your investments every hour. A headline appears, the market moves, you get nervous. Another headline appears, the market rises. You become excited, you buy more, then something unexpected happens. The market falls again. Now you're reacting emotionally to every movement. That's exhausting. A long term investor can approach the market differently. Instead of asking what happens today, they can ask whether the underlying investment still makes sense for their long term goal. That's a completely different mindset. Markets move, companies change. Economies expand and contract. Interest rates change. New technologies appear. Political events happen. Consumer preferences evolve. Nobody can predict all of it, but you can control how you respond. You can control how much you learn. You can control whether you're diversified. You can control whether you're investing money you actually understand. And you can control whether you're thinking in years instead of days. This is where patience becomes incredibly valuable. Suppose you invest in a broad collection of businesses. You aren't expecting every company to be perfect. You're accepting that some businesses will grow faster than others. Some will struggle. Some may be replaced. Meanwhile, the overall economy can continue evolving. New companies can become major businesses. Old companies can adapt. Industries can transform. That's one reason broad market investing can be attractive to people who don't want to spend their lives researching individual stocks. You don't have to predict the future perfectly. You can participate in the broader growth of businesses. Now, does that mean individual stocks are bad? Not at all. For someone who enjoys researching companies, individual stocks can be an interesting part of investing. Companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Visa, Alphabet, and others are worth studying because they're major businesses with enormous influence in the modern economy. But studying a company is different from blindly buying its stock. You should understand what you're buying. Look at how the company makes money. Look at its competitive advantages. Look at its financial health. Look at its growth. Look at its risks. And think about whether the stock's valuation makes sense. That's where a beginner begins moving from speculation toward investing. And there's another idea that deserves attention. You don't have to invest everything at once. Many investors prefer contributing gradually over time. This approach is sometimes called dollar cost averaging when an investor regularly invests a set amount regardless of short term market movements. The advantage isn't that it guarantees profits. It doesn't. The benefit is that it can create a consistent investing habit and reduce the temptation to constantly guess the perfect moment to enter the market. You invest, you continue learning. You stay focused on your long term plan, and you allow time to do its part. Of course, investing involves risk. Stocks can lose value. Individual companies can experience major problems. Even diversified funds can decline substantially during difficult periods. That doesn't mean investing is something to fear. It means understanding risk is part of understanding investing. Before investing, it's important to have a financial foundation appropriate for your situation. That can include understanding your regular expenses, keeping money available for short term needs, and avoiding putting money into stocks that you may need immediately. Money needed soon and money intended for long term investing serve different purposes. That's a simple distinction that can save beginners a lot of stress. And this brings us back to the original question. What are the best stocks for beginners? The answer isn't one magical ticker symbol. It's not one company that will make you wealthy. It's not a secret stock hidden from everyone else. The better answer is this. Start by understanding strong, established businesses. Learn how broad index funds work. Understand diversification. Think about valuation. Consider your time horizon. And most importantly, build a strategy you can actually stick with. If you want to study individual companies, businesses like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Visa, and Alphabet can be useful starting points for learning because their products and services are visible in everyday life. If you want broad exposure to large American companies, An S&P 500 index fund is another concept every beginner should understand. And there are many different funds and investment products available, so it's important to research their fees, holdings, structure, and suitability rather than assuming every fund is identical. The point isn't to memorize a list. The point is to learn how to think. Because once you understand how businesses work, the stock market becomes much less mysterious. You begin seeing companies everywhere. When you use a payment terminal, you might think about the companies behind the payment network. When you open your laptop, you might think about the software company behind the operating system. When you order something online, you might think about the retail platform and the logistics infrastructure behind it. When you store a file in the cloud, you might think about the enormous technology infrastructure operating behind the scenes. The economy is all around you. And the stock market gives people a way to own pieces of some of those businesses. That's a powerful concept. But remember something. Investing isn't about becoming rich overnight. It's about giving yourself an opportunity to participate in long-term economic growth. It is a process. You learn, you research, you invest according to your circumstances, you remain patient, and you give your decisions enough time to work. The greatest advantage a beginner can have isn't a secret stock tip, it's education. The more you understand, the less you need to rely on somebody shouting predictions at you online. You can look at a company and ask your own questions. You can look at an index fund and understand what it owns. You can understand why diversification matters. You can recognize the difference between investing and speculation. And eventually, you can build your own financial philosophy. Maybe yours will involve mostly broad index funds. Maybe you'll also study individual companies. Maybe you'll focus on retirement investing. Maybe you're simply learning right now and want invest for years. All of those can be reasonable stages of the journey. The important thing is that you don't confuse investing with entertainment. The stock market is not a casino designed to make you feel excited every morning. It represents ownership in businesses. Businesses that employ people. Businesses that create products. Businesses that provide services. Businesses that solve problems. And when you approach investing from that perspective, everything starts becoming clearer. Instead of asking, what's going to explode tomorrow? You start asking, what business could continue creating value for many years? Instead of asking, how can I double my money quickly? You start asking, how can I build a sustainable long-term strategy? Instead of chasing whatever everyone online is talking about, you start learning how to think for yourself. And that shift is important. Because money doesn't have to be complicated to be meaningful. Small amounts can become part of a larger habit. A habit can become a system. A system can become a long-term financial foundation. And time can become one of your greatest advantages. So if you're beginning your investing journey, don't feel like you need to know everything today. You don't. Start with the basics. Learn what a stock represents. Learn what an index fund is. Understand diversification. Study businesses you already know. Learn how companies make money. Understand that returns are never guaranteed. And remember that investing involves risk. Then keep learning. Because the goal isn't to become the person who knows the hottest stock of the week. The goal is to become the person who understands what they're doing with their money. Years from now, you may look back and realize that the most important decision wasn't finding the perfect investment. It was learning to think long term. It was learning to stay patient. It was learning to let businesses work instead of constantly trying to predict the next headline. And it was learning that wealth isn't usually built through one dramatic moment. It can be built through thousands of small decisions made consistently over time. That's the quiet side of investing. No fireworks, no dramatic predictions, no promises of overnight wealth, just ownership, patience, learning, consistency, and time. The stock market will always have another headline. There will always be another company getting attention. There will always be another prediction about what happens next. But you don't have to chase all of it. Sometimes the smartest move is simply to understand what you own, diversify appropriately, stay informed, and keep your eyes on the long-term picture. Because investing isn't about predicting tomorrow. It's about preparing for the years ahead. And the earlier you start learning, the more time you have to understand how the game works. Your future doesn't need a perfect investment. It needs a thoughtful strategy. So learn the businesses, study the market, understand the risks. Start when you're ready and when it makes sense for your situation. And most importantly, give yourself time, because wealth isn't always built loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly in the background while you're busy living your life. And years later, you realize that the small decisions you made consistently were actually building something much bigger. That's the real power of long-term investing. Not predicting the future, not chasing hype, just owning productive assets, staying diversified, continuing to learn, and giving compounding the time it needs. This video is for educational purposes only and is not personalized financial advice. Investing involves risk, including the possible loss of money. Always research an investment and consider your own circumstances before making financial decisions. If you found this useful, subscribe to OWLCEO Academy. We're not here to chase quick money. We're here to understand how money actually works. And once you understand the rules, you can start playing the long game. See you in the next one.